Hello everyone, my name is Jinju Wong. I come from Australia in Deakin University because there is a visa problem, Xinhou can't come, so I will present this on behalf of him. It's okay. So the topic I'd like to share is whether Australia can achieve methane, net zero, and biodiversity goals in the same time. So here's a little bit about the background. We all global land programmers, so we know we human beings has put effort to do something to cure the Earth. That include the Paris Agreement, which to control the greenhouse effect. And we also have this global methane pledge. As in addition to that, we have several other goals, for example, biodiversity goals. So the question is, can we achieve them together in the same time? Because one goal often have tailored implications to other goals. So that's what we're trying to answer. This is the study area, which is the Australia. We focus on the agricultural land, which is these colorful pixels in this map. What we're trying, a bit of background is Australia has this food trade, which is 72% of its agricultural product was exported, and 28% was consumed domestically. Besides that, the Australia has a transition diet. So we envisioned some trajectories, including business as usual, the vegetarian trajectory, and other flexitarian, which is middle of the way diet trajectory. The question to conserve, to restore biodiversity is we can restore the used land back to forest, or we can cut down the forest back to cropland to meet the demand. The key is we have multiple choices which all have interconnected connections to each other. So on the basis of that, we have developed a model to model the simultaneous effect of each of the impacts of different trajectories. So here is the method. Beginning in year 2010, we have the land use map of the Australia. Australia has 28 land uses, starting from apple, beef, citrus, and all the way down to winter cereal. And in the next year, we envisioned some non-agricultural land use. This is trying to answer the question: if we want to mitigate the carbon emissions, we need planting trees. So planting trees and some other measures was here in this 8 non-agricultural land use. And on top of that, we also have another 5 agricultural management strategies, which is, for example, for beef land, if we want to reduce some greenhouse gas emissions, we can feed the cow with some seagrass, so the cow will emit less greenhouse gas, and some other measures including fertilizer modification, so the crops will emit less greenhouse gas compared to the previous plantation. Okay, starting from the year 2010, and with all those solutions, now we have some target space, and that is the key of the model. We have to meet food demand. That is we can see an increased food demand in the future. In the meanwhile, we want to use as most 80% of the water compared to pre-industrial level. And in addition to that, we want to restore some biodiversity loss. And at last, we also want to meet the greenhouse gas target, which is the 3 lines, 3 trajectories. Oftentimes, sometimes we only care about one target or one indicators, for example, greenhouse gas, and forget about its implications on biodiversity. But now we have this model to consider all of this in one time. For all of this solution space and this target space, for each of the land use, we now will give them some productivity index, some biodiversity performance, as well as water use and greenhouse gas emissions and reductions. And our model will optimize the land use based on either a maximum profit or minimized cost economic logic to finally get to the target year where all the target was met and we now have the maximum profit or minimum cost. Okay, to be more specifically, we have different trajectories, which is SSP and food demand. But what's really important to keep in mind is what is the trade-offs between greenhouse gas target and biodiversity. Please keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. We will see how those two targets impact each other. Okay, that's just the different targets in our model. This is the different greenhouse gas target trajectory. And here is different demand for different commodities. Here is the biodiversity restore targets in the model, and here is the water use. Now is the exciting part, is the result. So, from left to right, we have even difficult greenhouse gas targets. So we are asking Australia to sequestrate or to reduce greenhouse gas emissions more and more. From top to bottom is we asking Australia to restore biodiversity. This 0% means we doesn't care about biodiversity. This two target means we want to restore more and more biodiversity targets. So the quick takeaway is here. Let's comparing the different biodiversity targets. If we stress the models to ask for more biodiversity conservation, looks like Australia needs to really think about control the wildfires, which is this savanna burning. We can see as we asking for more diversity restoration, the fire control becomes more and more important. Okay, that's one thing. Another finding we found is from the left to right. If we asking Australia to conserve, to reduce greenhouse gas more and more, looks like it will increase more of agricultural technology investment. That makes sense because the agricultural technology will increase the productivity and reduce the greenhouse gas emission at the same time. So the takeaway here is different target goals will create different priorities for the land use modeling. This is another findings. As we push more hard to restore more, to sequestrate more greenhouse gas, the model will take the SPECS strategy, which is the bioenergy store. Because bioenergy is both profitable and as well as it will meet the greenhouse gas target. And seeing from top to bottom, we can see that if we asking for more biodiversity, if we emphasize more on biodiversity perspective, the model tells us that Australia needs to plant more trees because trees in the forest system, the biodiversity will restore, and at the same time it will sequestrate more carbons. Alright, that is another side of the story. It basically tells the spatial distribution of what we just observed. As we push the model harder on biodiversity target, it will plant more trees on this region. This is the same story. If we ask for more of biodiversity restoration, the Australia really need to do is to control the wildfires. So that is our findings. We found the tele interconnections between different sustainable goals, and we can achieve them in the same time. And the key is by emphasizing different goals, the model says we need to adopt very different strategies. So that's all. Thank you.
Are there other questions from the audience? You guys take it over.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. I was just trying to get a bit of clarification on your biodiversity indicators, which seem to be linked to your tree planting. So I guess two parts. Does your model take account of different tree species and different woodland or forest management practices and how biodiversity friendly they are, or is it just the amount of trees? And do you have any other biodiversity indicators other than trees, or plan to put any into the model in the future?
Thanks. For the tree planting, what we consider is not specific species, but we are considering their management type. For example, we can plant trees on the unused land. That's one strategy. Or we can plant trees on the beef land. That's agroforestry. So it's not species-based, it's strategy-based. For another question, how we calculate the biodiversity, we assigned each land use with a weight, which indicates its importance to restore the biodiversity. So each land use of each pixel will have a score for biodiversity. So we use that as to calculate the restoration.
Yes, hello, Martin from Anthony. I have a question about this water use, because you showed that there's a 20% of the discharge that you can use. So are you using this 20% entirely for agriculture? Because then if there's additional water use on top of this, how would this work then?
Thanks. That's a very good question. What we taking for sustainability water use is from the paper or the concept of safe operation planetary boundary, which says if we use the water that is less than 80% to its pre-industrial level, this will be sustainable. To more specific, how we get that done is we divided Australia into different drainage regions. Each pixel will has an associated water use, water consumption score. We summed up all the pixels within each region and tell the model to not using over 80% of the water compared to its compared to the level. Thanks.
Actually, I'd like to ask something, and this reflects my deep ignorance of Australian ecosystems. It seems like savanna burning and addressing that seems to show up mostly in the 50% targets. It seems to me that would be the first thing you do. It seems like it should be relatively easy compared to some of these other things, like precision agriculture, which sounds expensive. But I mean, presumably that's in the model. So could you just explain what's going on? Why that only shows up relatively late? It seems like.
Yeah. My reasoning, reflection on this is savanna burning has a large area in the whole northern territory of Australia. It's not economically. So you mentioned it's much easier to control fire economic, but I suspect. Sorry, that's my suspicion. I suspect that if we control more savanna burning, that means maybe we are losing some water somewhere else. This is different modules which is interconnected with each other. So economically makes sense. Might has implications on water or greenhouse gas or other aspects.
Okay, thanks. So, let's thank our speaker. We should probably stay on schedule.
As this is getting set up, that's okay, yeah. I'm Paul West. I work at Project Drawdown. I'm an ecologist, and what I'll be sharing today is a little bit about a project that we had worked on in the first part of the year. So it was a little bit more of a pilot analysis that I'll be sharing. You'll see that it's heavy on pictures, light on graphs. So it's a little bit of a change, and hopefully that's okay with a bunch of scientists, including myself. What I'm sharing here is part of a large team where we did sort of rapid assessment in order to see what is possible, and I'll explain what I'm talking about, what is possible, in a few minutes. Okay, so in general, we have three or more large of challenges in the world that are all interwoven, and yet unfortunately we aren't on track to meet any of them. And even more importantly is that a lot of the funding and policies tend to be set up around the SDGs or biodiversity or the Paris Agreement, so oftentimes there is a lot of conflict. And some of that is because when we look at climate funding and climate policy, we oftentimes talk about, well, if you work on climate, it's good for people. If you work on biodiversity, it's good for people. But there's a challenge with that, though, is that especially in areas of the world where a lot of people's basic needs aren't met, it's offensive and wrong to just see individuals and people as a co-benefit. So what I'm going to be talking about here is a little bit more of like, well, what if we flipped it around and took a people-first approach? So our work here was part of a USAID effort, part of Feed the Future, that was an ongoing effort for a number of years. It ended earlier of this year, and they had some additional funding at the end, and they asked if we would do a pilot analysis along the lines of what I'm going to share here. So what we did is try and see what is possible with a certain amount of data that's available everywhere in the world. So this effort at USAID is mainly focused on intensification. So how do we grow more crops or livestock on existing land? And a lot of that was done with climate smart agriculture approaches. So what a number of teams had found over the years was that there are a lot of opportunities to increase the amount of carbon and thus is water availability, and then increases in yields by doubling or increasing by a half or so as a result of shifting a management practice or a shift in the seed varieties. But what we wanted to do was say, well, instead of doing more of what all these other teams had done in the past, is let's step back a little bit and look at more broader view of the food system. So this is a project in Senegal where most of the rural population works in agriculture, and yet it's a country where a lot of hunger is widespread, especially in certain areas of the country. And some of that is because about 3/4 of the food that is consumed in Senegal is imported from other countries. So as a result of that, food security is very much tied to income. Even more so than increasing the amount of food that is produced on land. So if we look at food security from a perspective along those lines, we know that, or a number of studies have shown that the amount of income is tied to access to electricity. And then there are other issues as far as access to clean water, which of course affects health, and a lot of the cooking in Senegal, as well as a number of places around the world, is using a lot of charcoal and wood, which the indoor air quality from a lot of the stoves is the leading cause of early deaths in Senegal and throughout a lot of sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia. So all that information is nice, but we then wanted to see, the way AID has worked in the past is invested in a place and then sort of assumed that what is learned there expands out to other places. So we instead then asked, if we look at what are the needs, where are the needs across the landscape, and not just have a single number for a country. So in order to do that, we used the demographic and health survey data at the household level, and we looked at indicators of hunger or stunting, and you can see in some areas of the country it's as high as a quarter of the children under 5. And then when we looked at income, those areas that are dark there are areas where the amount of income is in the lowest quintile of the country. So we look at access to electricity, and what we see right now is that most of the power lines in the country really only extend to about here, and then along the north there. So certainly there are opportunities in the future to expand the grid. Most of the power plants there now, though, are heavy fuel oil, which of course has an impact on climate and air quality. And if you look at opportunities in terms of solar, it can be implemented in a short amount of time and not have to wait for a new plant and a new grid. So this is some work by other people. I just made a map of it. But all the areas that are darker on there are places where installing and maintaining solar panels are cheaper than a diesel generator. So we then looked at, approximately how much would it cost to install solar at the village scale, and we looked at, we set a criteria which was on the high end of availability, where we looked at over the course of the year, almost every hour electricity is available, and there was enough in order to power a refrigerator and other small appliances. So certainly if a goal is not as high as that, it's a smaller amount of cost. Here's a picture of a much smaller system that I talked about. And so when there is access to electricity, it opens up lots of opportunities of storage of food, so it doesn't spoil. And then, a lot of studies have shown that access to electricity, as I mentioned, opens up new opportunities for a lot of businesses, improves education, healthcare, access to clean water. And then after you look at the benefits of people, we also look at, well, in terms of climate, it might not be like a reduction in emissions right now, but it avoids emissions in the future, and it has an impact on biodiversity as well, without all the gathering of fuel wood, which I'm going to talk about right now. So, because access to electricity is mainly in the western part of the country, certainly access to clean cooking fuels is less as you move over to the east. Some other studies then had shown in terms of cost and benefits, in terms of health, what type of fuel is most optimal in these areas across the country. So then, access for cooking of cleaner fuels is important in terms of gender equality as well, because in general, about a lot of the women and kids are spending a half an hour up to a couple hours a day out and gathering wood. So we did analysis for all the stuff that I'm showing. All the data is available, and we did it at a finer scale, but most of the stuff I'm going to show now are at a coarser scale, but we have the finer scale underneath this. It's just a little easier to look at these kind of maps. So what this shows is the average amount of time that is saved if you switch to a cleaner fuel. As you move into the north, it is a lot drier, and so there's not as much available. Then when you look at opportunities of biogas, that is a cleaner fuel, and we look at the amount of life saved, which again, this was by another scientist, but across the country is that a large number of people a lot of deaths could be avoided every year, as well as there is an impact on the amount of emissions or pollution. We then also looked at agroforestry and restoration. What you'll find on the website, which I'll show a link for you, is we looked at the impacts of agroforestry on carbon, on yield, on pollination, and water quality and water quantity. So for our next steps, really what we did with our project here was is develop a number of data sets. It was not to try and come up with a master plan or recommendations. As a result of our team is outside of Senegal, and so what we are going to work with AID now and some of our partners in Senegal is to assess the utility of what we have developed and revise according to that. And then if you're interested in more, there's a report that a simple version that's a story map, and then all the data and a report is on the web too. Thank you.
I think we have time for one question.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Hi. Sorry. Thanks so much for the talk. That was really interesting. I had a quick question about actually implementing the solar. So you had mentioned that it was cheaper compared to the diesel generators. I was just wondering, solar prices, have continued to fall in the past decades, like multiple orders of magnitude. So I just wonder, with solar prices continuing to fall, is there talk of how these programs can expand for potentially the same price and affect like larger number of households and things like that?
Yeah, that's a good point. And then when that other team had done their analysis, I think it was a few years ago, and then as a result, even now, it's a lot cheaper. USAID and the World Bank and other programs do have a solar and energy programs across a lot of West Africa that I'm aware of. I'm sure Eastern Africa and Southern Africa as well. In terms of how they are doing that and the overall cost, I'm not sure. If you're interested, I know of a number of reports and colleagues that I can point you to. Thank you.
Okay, now for our final talk of the session is me. Sorry, James Gerber. So yeah, I'm talking about prioritizing food sector mitigation actions to maximize well-being, and I'm carrying the wrong thing over here because I need this. So it's been a great conference, but it's been a tiring conference. We're all, I think, exhausted, and so we've seen a lot of good talks. So I thought it'd be a lot of fun to give you a bad talk, okay, in a fairly structured way. So what makes a bad talk? Okay, here are 5 characteristics. Talking about things that aren't in the abstract, shameless self-promotion, bad justifications for citing, I published recently, going over my time in slides with horrendograms. Okay, I promise to do no more than 3 of these. That assumes that I can advance. Okay, so number 1, not following the abstract. So what I said I talked about was optimizing co-benefits. Okay, but I realized for this audience, I don't really need to show you that I can optimize co-benefits. What I'd much rather be doing is talking about a framework for giving you all the tools, the broader research community, journalists, the tools for doing this. What are those co-benefits? Climate, of course, but adaptation, benefits to nature, and human well-being. Okay, annoying things. Number 6 and number 7 are topics that weren't in the outline and going out of order. I'm going to try to not talk about co-benefits anymore. Okay, Paul, my colleague, touched on this as well. But really what motivates and mobilizes action is not the climate, but rather the other benefits, right? Cleaner air, cleaner water, jobs. So here's the shameless self-promotion part. So I'm at an organization, Project Drawdown, and we kind of got on the map 15 years or so ago, putting out a book of saying, hey, climate change isn't so scary, let's break it down, and here's a bunch of solutions that will help us get there. So we put out a book describing those solutions. Since then we've done a little bit more stuff, a lot of reviews, trying to stay on top of the science, translating it into multiple languages, and with a special focus on land use. So what's next for us, and here's really what I want to be talking about, is we really want to, again, give you all the tools to do assessments of climate solutions and all the benefits. Do it yourselves, basically. And so we want to give information on help you be able to figure out which are the important solutions, where should they be implemented, when, what's most important. Time, that's not always obvious. Sometimes the solution won't work for 20 or 30 years. Let's prioritize, and what's the best way to get it done, and who needs to know about this. So we're building towards putting out something that's called the Drawdown Explorer. So really, I'd like you all to know about this and look for it when it goes live. We hope it will be a really good resource. And now I'll talk about some of what's going in there, and even though I'm sort of pretending this is I'm trying to give a bad talk, this is sort of that optimization stuff is now going to be in here. So I want to just talk about some of the solutions and their co-benefits and how we spatialize and sort of elucidate that information that helps one figure out co-benefits. And I said I wouldn't say co-benefits. Benefits. So improved nutrient management. Okay, gratuitous self-citation coming up. So here's a map of emissions from fertilizer applied to croplands. And so, you can see, we don't need to talk about what these numbers mean because those are somewhat weird flux units, but it's very hard to put numbers on a map that are spatialized relative to things that we're used to thinking about, like 60 gigatons anthropogenic emissions per year, whatever. But I mean, one takeaway of this is that there's a lot of heterogeneity from fertilizer application. So this is nitrogen fertilizer and warming due to nitrous oxide emissions. And so while no one is saying that we should do away with fertilizer application because, of course, food security depends on it, I am saying that there are places where too much is going on and that could be dialed back. So how do we go about assessing that? And so here's some maps. I mean, these are just to kind of give you an idea. We have a research fellow working on this right now with more up-to-date data, but I don't have figures for that. Avery Driscoll at Project Drawdown. She's also a student of Nathan Mueller, who I think is in the room. So this is yield and fertilizer. And so how do we go from these maps of yield and fertilizer to figure out where there's excess N? I mean, you can see with your eye that there isn't perfect correlation, but there's a lot under the hood because climate may determine what the optimal amount of N should be. But we want to find an empirical approach to this. And so how do we go about this? And so how to calculate really a target rate. Like, what can we confidently say to someone, to a policymaker or someone trying to understand the general, picture, I guess. So that wasn't very clear, of what a good target rate is. So here's all those data points from the previous map. And so I'm showing a yield response curve with a fit to that yield response curve. So on the x-axis is how much nitrogen you're putting on the y-axis is the yield. And as you'd expect, if you put on no nitrogen fertilizer, you get zero yield, except where there's soil mining or maybe questionable data down near the origin. And then it levels off, of course. So, but I mean, some points on here are represent really too much fertilizer, and some points represent maybe not. It's hard to say. So basically, we proposed. So one way people have dealt with this in the past. Oops. Why is that there? Like, turn this upside down. Okay, is to reallocate and come up with an optimal yield that way. But what we're proposing doing here, one issue with reallocation is that there may be areas where you're actually suggesting things to farmers that would lead to smaller yields, which will make you unpopular. And so what we're proposing is using a 90-90 rule, is taking some recently published work on yield gaps and saying places in those maps where the yield gaps are small, right there, they've got very high attainable yields. See what the distribution of fertilizer application rates are there, and whatever the best nitrogen use efficiency, you say that's an approximation of what you could get to while still getting good yields. And so that gives us a way to calculate that. And so there's many devils in the details, because climate influences the maximum yield. Climate also influences the emissions that you actually get from nitrogen application. But leaving aside all the details that are never easy to get to in the talk, we find that this is the effectiveness of what we're saying is the improved nutrient management solution. Okay, so the total avoidable emissions is 0.26 gigatons CO2 per year. And I just one thing I'll point out is it's not, right, this does not line up with the maps I showed earlier. There was fertilizer, there was some fertilizer applied in Africa, say, but the solution is not at all applicable to Africa because there just is not over-fertilization there, or at least not over-fertilization that shows up in our global data sets. Okay, and the co-benefits, I won't go into them too much here, but we're spatializing those, so that will be available as well. And just some of the ones to mention is improved groundwater quality. Right, there's a lot of work out there that we'll be compiling on where nitrate concentrations in wells is high, dead zones, and getting to waterways. And then it's not a direct co-benefit, but proper nutrient management is key for closing yield gaps, which is critical for food security. So improved rice cultivation is another one I'd like to talk about, maybe in a little bit less detail, because here we're more there. We were actually doing the research ourselves. Here we're more pulling in other people's research, but it's really indicative of how we're hoping to approach this. So rice methane emissions is it's really a quite substantial part of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's 1 gigaton with 100-year global warming potential, which seems to be the standard. But if you use a 20-year, which in many ways I favor because we really want action before 2050, it's 3 gigatons because methane is such a powerful, if relatively short-lived greenhouse gas relative to carbon dioxide. So, but other reasons to deal with, to have an approved rice solution is that burning of rice straw is a huge issue. I'm not even going to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions here, in part because it's mediated through black carbon, which isn't typically quantified like in IPCC methodologies, but also really the human health impacts are more important, I think, than the CO2 impacts and the lack of nutrients getting back into the soil. Okay, there is global data on just how prevalent this issue is. We're incorporating that. I seem to have gotten bad with this thing. Okay, and water use is a key part, and I think this is actually, I'm particularly glad that I have this slide in here because we saw in the plenary in Matt's talk the importance of irrigation in being able to adapt to climate change via getting the rice crop started sooner, so you can get the wheat crop in time to avoid the heat in the grain filling season stage rather. So anyway, so solutions exist to these things, right? Here's some recently published work that sort of talks about taking these different aspects, that talks about, gives indications of how to implement these solutions, and then all these other things for which we're trying to pull data sets together. And so and this leads again to trade-offs. This is data from a paper from Bo et al. 2022. I should think Bo actually shared his data with me, for which I'm very grateful. Although pictures from his publication were nice, so I just pulled those out. But it's nice that he's willing to cooperate with us on that. But so here are two things that are some of the benefits, which are spatially different, and mitigation and water use reduction. So you do have different spatial patterns. Ooh, and time's up, and it's a good thing because I am almost done. I'll go into my question time. One last question. So we want to pull this together in a way that's useful for, again, an audience very much like this one, a Drawdown Explorer. So the outcomes of this should be an interoperable data set of emissions and other benefits, the basis for you, the explorers, to carry out optimizations, and we will start publishing these in the second quarter of 2025. So thank you for coming to that talk. I guess I can ask if there are any questions. Oh, sorry, is there time for questions? Oh, okay, we have time for questions then, if there are any. Thank you. Lonely, so lonely.
Yeah, well, I'll just remind you, I'm from Minnesota originally, far away from, so even though I'm from Indiana group, but run easier. But thinking about some of the things you talked about, even though I've left the farm long ago, but like the farmers in southern Minnesota and their corn and soybeans, and then bringing in their systems now of bringing in like with the hog manure and these types of transitions. Are you? And then there's some that are mosaics in Minnesota, even of no-till. So some of those transitions, like in the heart of the U.S., in some of these models, what have you, for the nitrogen that you were talking about, have you got into any of those numbers? Because I saw the Minnesota on your map, the nitrogen was quite high. So is there any improvements or any changes in these last that you guys see or going forward? What are, like, in those contexts where I don't see anybody adapting too much climate smart ideas? What are some of the recommendations in those contexts? Or if you have any thoughts on what we might be able to do in those contexts?
I think I want to have Nathan Mueller, who's in the audience, answer that. Nathan, I'll just try, but if you want to add anything. One thing I will say about the particular cases of Minnesota, very dominant on the landscape is maize. And even though the N application rates are very high, it's actually not what lights up in terms of this method saying you can decrease those emissions. So in other words, the nitrogen use efficiency isn't terrible. It could be improved, but since this is fundamentally an empirical method, and maize in Minnesota is done fairly efficiently, in relative terms, these global approaches do not. So right, these are sort of someone should look into this and then consult your local agronomist before you do anything. But certainly there are practices that would improve, could maintain yields and reduce and fertilizer. And Nathan, seriously, if you want to add anything to that, I won't be offended. Okay. Well, I guess we should wrap up. Oh, okay.
Thank you so much, James. And I'm just curious about the map of the burning straws of rice cultivation. So, what kind of data is it's which year? This is a current situation or some old data? Since in my experience, I'm from China, so in my experience, currently the burning straw is not a common way to deal with straws for rice, and also for other cereals. So I'm interested in the time of that map. So which year?
Okay, that's a great question. I got that map from Singh et al. In 2021. And as I recall, it was a sort of a survey of data from the previous decade. So I don't remember when that was taken, and it could be longer. I very much appreciate your comment, and I've read in other sources that China does not burn rice straw anymore. There are a few countries where there's just very little rice straw burning. And so if that map showed otherwise, that's good to know. I will correct that accordingly. Okay. But it's also because the scale, right, was summed up over the countries. It wasn't an intensity.
For my limited knowledge, because of some air pollution problems, the government have some strict policies to avoid the burning of straws because they think that will contribute to the air pollution. So recently, the crop straw is not allowed. Yeah.
That's good to know, and my knowledge is far more limited, so thank you.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what are all the solutions that you hope to include in the Explorer?
That is a lovely question. Thank you. I did not plant that question, but I wish I had. There were 100 in that book I showed you. We've consolidated a few and just taken a few out because they're kind of they're small or practical, or combine them. So there's so many, it would be hard to go through them. But I will say that I think one key thing is that we're limiting the solutions to things that are currently applied at a significant scale. So demonstration projects we're not including. Okay, because there's a huge technological leap to get from demonstration projects to implementation on a time scale that matters. So we're limiting to things that are currently in existence. So
So in the solutions, do you have anything on the consumption side, demand side? So diets, for example? You just left,
I can't wear two hats. Yes, we have a solution for reducing, for changing diets and also reducing waste. So, and I forget where we came down on dividing, reducing food waste into sort of on-farm loss and loss in the once it leaves the farm. But yeah, that's a huge lever, of course. So I couldn't hear. Okay, yes. So let's wrap this up. Thank you very much for coming. Let's thank me and the other two speakers.